Good evening. Tonight we're going to start with lesson 4 in our decimal unit. I can use meters to model the decomposition of one whole into hundredths. I can represent and count hundredths. So now we're moving from the tenths to 100. And if we just look at 1 centimeter is equal to 1/100th of a meter. So this is something that we're going to be focusing on today. If we look at a decimal like something like this, 0.27, we've been used to seeing the 2, because the 2 is in the tenths place, but now we're adding a new place, which is called the hundredths. So this is no holes. This is 2 tenths, and then we added another one. So how we would read this is 0 and 27 hundredths, because that is where the 7 is in, that last number. Whatever the last number is in, that is what we call it. So 0 and 27 hundredths. If I did another one, 0 and 0.35, we would read this as 0 and 35 hundredths, because the 5 is in the hundredths place. All right, so our first example we see is 4.37. How we would read that would be 4, because there's 4 holes, 4 and 37 hundredths. So now what we need to do is create a number line, and we're going to start with 4 because that's what we have here, 4 holes. But 37 hundredths is in between the next hole, and the next hole would be a 5. All right, so let's first look at the 3, and the 3 is in the tenths place. And let's start adding our all right, so now we have split this up into tenths. So let's find 3. So if we wanted to decompose this, we would have 4 holes plus 3 tenths. So let's find 3 tenths on this number line. 3 tenths would be right here. Oops. This would be 4 and 3 tenths. All right, and the next one would be 4 and 4 tenths. But we are now adding another thing to this, which would be 7 hundredths. So now we're going to have to zoom in and split this between 4 and 3 tenths and 4 and 4 tenths. We need to cut this up now into tenths, because 10 times 10 is 100. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So where would our 7 be? Our 7 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's going to be right here. So let me change the color. This becomes 4 and 37 hundredths. Let's zoom out. Wow, look at that. So that is where 4 and 37 hundredths would be placed on this number line. All right, in our first one here, we have a model of, it's shaded, and we got one box here that's shaded. And this whole thing is equal to 1 meter. And just this one box is 1/10 of a meter. But then look what they did. They have a second box, and then it's cut up into more tenths. So if this whole thing is tenths, then another one is cut up. This one was going to represent the hundredths. So let's start adding this up. We've got 1/10 of a meter plus, how many of those hundredths are colored in? Well, we get 3 hundredths of a meter are colored in. All right, so now what I would have to do is I would have to take this 1/10 and then convert it into hundredths. And that means I would just have to be slicing these up again, our model here, just to show that. 10 times 10. And 10 times 10 is 100. So if we multiply the top and the bottom by 10, we would now have 100 in the denominator. And 1 times 10 would be 10. And then we can continue adding this. 10 hundredths plus 3 hundredths. 10 hundredths of millimeter plus 300 millimeter is equal to 13 hundredths meter. Which really, if we have to put this in decimal form, we do not have any holes. So 0 and 13 hundredths, the 3, is in the hundredths place. So it becomes 13 hundredths of a meter. Now they're asking us to make a number bond also. So if we take our decimal, 13 hundredths, we can pull out a tenth and a 300th. That's how it would look like as decimals. We can also show this 13 hundredths. All right, we can pull out 1/10 and then 3 hundredths. So this is using our number bonds. All right, our next example is showing us a model of 1 meter, and looks like this has been broken up into tenths, and 4 has been shaded in, so that would be 4/10. So let's write that out. We have 4/10 of a meter has been shaded in. But now, if we look over here, we see this next one has been cut up. That 1/10 there, that box has been cut up into another tenth, which what represents 100th, right? So that's 100th right there. So in that case, we are going to say how many are shaded in? Well, there are 6 shaded in, so this becomes 6 hundredths of a meter. All right, so now we're going to have to convert this 4/10 into hundredths, because then we got to be able to add these. And how we do that is by taking, if we had to split these up into tenths, just like this one was, then we're dealing with 40, because this becomes 10, 20, 30, 40, multiplying the top and the bottom by 10. So when we do that, we are now going to get 40 hundredths of a meter plus 6 hundredths of a meter, which is equal to 46 hundredths of a meter. And then looking like that as a decimal, we have no holes, and 46 hundredths, the 6 is in the hundredths place. Now, how does this look like if we were going to use it as a number bond? Well, the 4 is in the tenths place there, and the 6 is in the hundredths place. Or we could say 0 and 4/10, or 0 and 0, because the 6 is in the hundredths place. Okay, our next one, 41 hundredths of a meter. So they want us to model 41 hundredths using this model here. It's broken up into tenths. So that means just one of those boxes we would have to divide up again to represent a hundredths. So let's start off by making a number bond of 41 hundredths, and this is our decimal. And what do we got there? And the 4 is in the tenths place, so this becomes 4/10. And the 1 is in the hundredths place. Or else it also can look like this: 4/10 and 1/100. So that can look like this as well. So let's model 4/10. And when we model 4/10, we want to shade this. This is 1, 2, 3, and 4, because that represents 4/10. But now we have that 1/100ths to make that 41/100ths. So we want to now take the next box and split that up into tenths. How we're going to do that is we're going to zoom in, and we are going to split this up into tenths. Oops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we have our tenths. So now what we want to do is just shade in one of those because it's 1/100ths. So let's change the color and let's shade in just this part right here. Wow, 1/100th is very small. So let's zoom back out again and see that. See, check that out. Look how small this 1/100th is. Very small. So that represents 41/100ths. This whole thing represents 41/100ths. All right, and our next one is 82/100, and they want us to draw a number bond and then do an equivalent decimal to 82/100ths. What's the equivalent of a decimal to that number, to that fraction? So if we take 82/100ths and we make this into a number bond, we're going to see the 8, and the 8 is what we say is in the tenths place, or it looks like this as a decimal. And then we've got the 2, and the 2 is in the hundredths place, which also could look like, there's no tens, but the 2 is in the hundredths place. So that's how it looks like in the number bond, and showing how the fractions are looking like into the decimals. But now we need to show 82/100 looking as a decimal. All right, there is no wholes, so we need to represent that with 0 and, here's our decimal, then it becomes 8 and then a 2, because the 2 is in the hundredths place. The 8 is in the tenths, but the 2 is in the hundredths place, so how we would read this is 0 and 82/100ths. All right, we're going to continue this with 76/100ths, and we're going to make that number bond, and then we're going to show the equivalent decimal to 76/100. So let's start this out. We're going to make 76/100ths, and we're going to pull out that 7. That 7 represents 7/10ths, or 0.7, because the 7's in the 10th spot. All right, and then on the side, we're going to show that the 6 is in the hundredths place, which would actually look like 0.06 to show the hundredths. Now, what is this going to look like as a decimal? Well, we don't have any wholes, so we're going to put a 0 as a placeholder. We're going to show the decimal point end, 0 end, 76, because the 6 is in the hundredths place. The 7 is in the tenths, and the 6 is in the hundredths. So we don't read this as 0 and 76/10ths. We would read this as 0 and 76/100ths, because it's showing that the 6 is in the hundredths place, and that's how we read it. If you don't practice, you don't deserve to win. Do your best on the next couple of problems. Problem number 1. First, you're going to write out the equation. Then you're going to create a number bond. And that's all going to be done on a separate piece of paper, because I want to see your work tomorrow. And then you're going to answer, what decimal does this model represent? Okay, using this meter stick, this model, to show 15 over 100 of a meter, you're going to draw the same exact one out, and you are going to model and show 1500ths on it. And then you're going to create a number bond of 1500ths, and then you're going to answer, what is the decimal for 1500ths? What is the equivalent decimal to that fraction? And I want to see all this work tomorrow. Okay, your last one, 23 over 100ths of a meter. You're going to first draw a number bond, and then I want to see the total, but I want to see it as an equivalent decimal. What's the equivalent decimal to 23 over 100? And bring in your work tomorrow. Practice like you've never won. Perform like you've never lost. Great job tonight. Have a wonderful night.